So so I do understand it. I do understand all of these things. I don't suffer from them anymore. So I'm that category of I have memories of it. So yeah, if that answers your question.
It does, yeah. So that's interesting because I've spoken to a lot of people, pretty much all the guests I've had on the show still talk about this fear of getting in front of the camera, of feeling nervous before they get on, and but yeah, a few people, everyone has a different take on this. So I always like to ask people this. And do you have any memories of like an embarrassing moment or a disastrous live stream that you've done, or getting on camera and things have not gone quite so well?
Um, I think the worst one, well, not the worst one because I really enjoyed it. I was interviewed, or it ended up being a big fat discussion with Dr. Dan Maggs, and I swore so much on it that I thought, well, he'll just beep those out, or he'll just cut those out, and he didn't. This is quite recent, actually. So I thought, I'm a bit of a potty mouth because I just did see it as a conversation. So, and then Dan sent me a message to say he's left it all in, and but it was quite funny because this is on the internet somewhere. He left it all in, but put a disclaimer video beforehand. So I was like, that comes to something, doesn't it? If it just, I'm really sorry. Anna Pinkerton's next, so forgive me for her foul mouth. Kind of thing. So he lured me into a false sense of security, saying, "You just be yourself, just talk normally," and which I did, and yeah, so he left it all in. So I mean, I'm beyond really caring what people are thinking about it. My biggest concern is not offending somebody, but I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. I'm always going to offend somebody inadvertently. I think that's part of life. But that's what I care about. I wouldn't want to hurt anybody or give them some advice that makes things worse for them. Okay, that's my big thing. What I look like, and if I watch my language, muck it up, it's less concern.
I'm impressed with that because yeah,
I too much therapy and to worry about that, and you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I think at the end of the day, if you offend somebody by the way you look or the way you sound, there's not much you can do about that, is there?
Yeah.
But
you can't legislate for people being offended by something you say. Obviously, if people are offended by it, that I'd come and hurt them physically. Of course, I would, and I would never do that. But you can't know what people are going to be offended by. But if I wouldn't want to hurt somebody, so I'm more worried about that than how I come across particularly or how I look. Yeah, because I always start out with a good intention.
I love that, and I think that's a good philosophy for us all. We're never going to be liked by everybody. This is something that I've personally struggled with. I want to be liked, and so I've allowed that in the past to change the way I put myself forwards and just say maybe some of my idiosyncrasies. We're all a bit weird, aren't we? But we tend to kind of like cut out all the weirdness, and we become this sanitized version of ourselves on social media, particularly, but just the way we interact, and that's so boring. And I think age has helped with me getting older, but also just coming to the realization that actually people just want to find out the real us. And that's one of the reasons why I love live video. Although I kind of get scared, I still get scared about it. I still get scared that I'm going to be judged and that people are going to think I'm rubbish. But my ultimate aim is I want to help people through what I do. So I'm sure you could unpack all the stuff that I've just said. But
no, don't worry. Just because I'm a psychotherapist doesn't mean I can read minds.
I know. So let's define some things, because I think everyone has a different definition of imposter syndrome. And actually recently, I was picked up in a presentation I was giving about a live video, and I was talking about the barriers that people put up. So it could be imposter syndrome is one of them, comparison syndrome. There's all these things, and I was picked up by using the word syndrome in a negative way. But I think we've all got these different definitions. So how would you well, first of all, because you talk, one of the things that you really focus on in your business is the whole concept of burnout. So I wanted to talk about that. What is burnout, and how is that misunderstood and underestimated?
Okay, that's a small question.
It is.
Okay, so burnout is sometimes misunderstood, and it's often considered sometimes an attitude of mind or a fizzling out of someone's fervour. Now, it's actually a really complicated mixture of things. It's a mixture of neuroscience, so a person's neurology, their other physiological symptoms, and their psychology. So you can't really have, although I know neurology is physiology, I kind of separate those in my mind. And there's a triangular relationship between those three things. So it's not a mental health condition, it's not a physical condition, it's not just a neurological condition, although it can be. It's a mixture of those things, and I think that's how I see it. So I see it in that framework, I see it visually, and so it's complicated, but with a simple formula in a way. There's three elements to it. We try to discover what they are, what might have got somebody to there, and what might get them out.
So if somebody was to reach this point of burnout, what would be maybe some of the how would you see that? What are the what's the words I'm looking for? What are the kind of outcomes of that? What are the symptoms of that?
Okay, so burnout manifests in many ways. So burnout can actually be somebody dropping down with a heart attack, having a stroke, having a brain hemorrhage, having a digestive disorder that's life-threatening. And all of these have reasons and physiology behind them due to chronic stress. And yeah, we haven't got time to go into those, but they all have good reasons for being there. So they can manifest very surprisingly and shockingly in those ways. You can have people who maybe develop anxiety for the first time in their lives, or depression, or poor confidence, and they start to not be able to rely on their decisions. So you can have two types of burnout. One is that are slow to build, so it might take months, years to start showing proper symptoms. Or you can have one shocking event like a heart attack, stroke, or something like somebody having an outburst at work, for instance. They've managed the stressors for so long and suddenly they can't anymore, and they do something out of character. So there's two ways to burn out. And it's really important to be cognizant of those. Preferably, we find, obviously with a shocking event, we can't always see it coming, but we can see some of the elements that create it. If we're going to do 60, 70-hour weeks, then we need to be fairly certain that somebody's not going to be able to keep that up and stay well. Mm. So there are some things that are obvious, or commonsensical in a way, and some that are not so.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So I think we're all different. We've all got different experiences. And so for some people, if you're working like an 80-hour week, the chances of you burning out are probably going to be very high. But would you say, like, for some people, their tolerance level is a lot lower? So some people actually might not be working quite as hard as that, but they're still got the potential of burnout.
I do think it depends on the circuitry. So we are all at the mercy of our circuitry. So I say to people, look, you've only got a certain size circuit board. And if you continue to override it and you continue to go beyond your limits, your whole system, your mind and your body are going to recalibrate you, whether you like it or not, and create symptoms that tell you to slow down or stop. And of course, entrepreneurs, who are usually the people I work with, are terrified of slowing down because they think it will make them stop and stop what their mission is. So I can't remember, I've lost my thread there. Tell me where you were going with that. I was
So yeah, I was just the whole idea of that we've all got different.
Oh yeah, the different circuitry. Okay, this is how I see it, and I've done over 29,000 hours of working with people who have broken down. Okay, this is how I see it. I think everybody has a similar sized circuitry, and that's why we can see and predict elements that will break you down. If you're doing 60 hours a week and you don't eat properly and you live off cigarettes and coffee or tea and nothing else, then you're going to burn out. The chances of you burning out are high. What I see is there are other people might say they're blessed with a bigger circuitry, so they can do the 60-hour week for a tad longer, let's say. And I know that there's this, there's a narrative around, I can do it, I can succeed. Well, of course, I will always see the people that break, but I think something suffers. And that's what I want to do in terms of prevention, is that we don't have to suffer and then recalibrate when we're not well. Is there really any need to do 60, 70-hour, 80-hour weeks? Do you know what I mean? Why are we doing that to ourselves in the first place? Really?
Well, dare I use the word hustle here? This whole, it's like a badge of honor sometimes. I think that, if you are seen to hustle, I don't like the word, but it equates to working really hard. If you're seen to do that, then you will succeed. And there is a big problem, I think, in the world that we live in, particularly in the marketing, social media space, entrepreneurial space, in that we see so many people sharing what they're doing. Like, I got up at 4 a.m. and I went to the gym and I did this, and we've got this issue where I think we can compare ourselves to other people. And so I've always believed that, we've got different seasons in our lives. If you're a parent, then you're probably not going to have as much time as some other people who maybe the kids have left home, or there may be different circumstances, but also we've got different. I like what you say there about we've got different circuitry or different sizes of circuitry. So what somebody else can cope with, we might not necessarily be able to in our current situation. Do you think there's some truth in that?
Or want to. I don't want to work a 60-hour week. So I don't care whether somebody else is doing 60, 70 or 80. I do not care. That is not my life. And their social media does not define my life. It probably doesn't define theirs either. But they're entitled to do what they want to do, and they're entitled to break themselves if they want to. I don't want to. So, we've got to be careful that we don't buy into the narrative of what hustle is. I don't care what bloody hustle is. Okay? I just don't care about it. And if it means that my business is slightly less successful, then I'd rather sustain it over the next 25 years than not, right? I'm not bought into what somebody else desires in their business. I'm bought into what my business does for the people I work with and for, and myself and my family, right? So it's compare and despair. Look, if we all compared ourselves to Gary Vaynerchuk, we'd all feel shit, wouldn't we, right? But even he's recalibrating, and I'm really pleased. I'm proud to see that he's doing that. He's talking about slowing down, taking time. He's talking about kindness, for goodness sake. This is Gary Vee, and he's talking about looking after himself, because what's the point if you can't sustain what your mission is? Sorry, that's my high horse coming out.
Well, yeah, if you're watching live or watching the replay or listening to the podcast, what do you think about what Anna's said there? That's, in some ways, I wouldn't say it's controversial, but it spoke with passion. Personally speaking, I totally agree with you. I want to say a big amen for that, because it's something that I think we need to speak about a lot more. And I'm really glad, like you, that Gary Vaynerchuk is starting to talk about this. I mean, Gary Vaynerchuk, if you don't know, if you're watching and you haven't heard of him, or he's been a big proponent of the whole hustle thing, working really hard. But I wonder whether he's said that, but that a lot of people have taken what he said out of context a little bit and spoken about all of this pushing hard, working hard all the time. So I really agree, and I suppose so. I suppose I know what you're going to say from my next question, which is this a big problem for entrepreneurs?
Well, it is a problem if you make it one, right? And I think Gary Vaynerchuk is right. I can listen to the guy to Kingdom Come. You know, he's incredibly easy to listen to. I love a lot of what he says. I really do. Um, and he's probably right. You know, my business isn't going to be where it could be unless I do 16 hours a day, but I don't care about doing 16 hours a day. You know, I'm happy doing my 10 hours a day, twice a week. You know, I'm happy. I know the consequences and I take responsibility for that. I think what Gary is saying, and rightly so, don't moan, or you can moan if you want. If you're going to moan or not be happy with your results, then up your hours, up what you do. I think it's that equation he's talking about, really. And that's fine. And the reason why burnout exists is because people fall out of love with what they're doing. They fall out of love with themselves, and they do the 16 hours a day, probably for somebody else's business often. But even if their own, they were loved it once, but now they're falling out of love with it because it's taking too much, and they haven't recalibrated and kind of reverse engineered that and going, actually, I do really, really well on an 8-hour day. And I really bloody love it still. And I think that's the issue. Nobody has to do anything they don't want to do. And, you know, if people want to moan about it, they can. Again, we don't have to listen to it.
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe having somebody that you can have a moan to, yeah, whether that's in a mastermind group or something like that, where you can, because I think if you leave it inside, if you're not even realizing that you're hating what you're doing, what your business has become, then that's a problem. So the next question really I wanted to ask you is the whole area of being hard on ourselves. So why do you think, why are some of us, so I definitely am hard on myself. I beat myself up a lot about what I don't achieve. And why do you think some of us are so hard on ourselves and others are not? And how can we avoid this? How can we become, I don't know whether this is the right phrase, but we can become a real fan of ourselves and be a cheerleader of ourselves and help us move forwards in our personal life, but also in our business?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, my take on this is the core of the work that I do. Now, we're all born full of ourselves. You know, when children are little, you'll hear parents and families say, oh, they're full of themselves, they are. Now, something happens in the developmental process, particularly in the culture of the UK, where we start to mutate that. We start to learn from the adults around us that it's actually not okay to be full of ourselves. It's fine when you're 5, but being full of yourself at 15, 20 years old, we start to look like we're arrogant, or people construe that as arrogance. It's really not okay in the UK to be full of pride and full of oneself. So I think what happens developmentally is we start to learn, oh, this doesn't go down so well in the world. So I'll just I'll fall out with myself about that. You know, I'll do something I'm not proud of and I'll beat myself up for a while, or I'll make a decision about myself, more importantly. I might think, okay, oh, I didn't pass that exam, I'm an idiot. So that gets put in place, say at the age of 14. I didn't pass the exam, I'm an idiot, I'm thick, I'm not as good as I thought I was. So that person recalibrates, that gets imprinted neurologically and starts to become a belief as though it's true. And then people operate as though that's true, which of course it's not a truth. It became a belief based on an experience that was slightly bastardized along the way. Okay? So if you explode that out over the lifespan, and you've got literally hundreds of experiences that go into your neurology in a way that's kind of not just your own, because you're looking at the world going, oh God, I can't be proud, I can't be clever. You know, we start to mutate, and then we start to be at the mercy of that operating system, which is really not ours. It's being adapted to be in this world. Right? Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. So yeah, and yeah, I worry in a sense for my kids as they grow up, and they're at this age now when they are being a lot more self-aware or aware of the people around them, and I want to help them through what I've learned about through this process, you know, to not beat themselves up. I want them to feel confident in themselves. But of course, you don't want to you don't want to appear arrogant. So, what's your advice?
You know, it's so interesting. Like literally every single person I've ever worked with would go, "Oh, if I'm in good relationship with myself, I don't want to be arrogant." I was like, well, okay, as long as you're not going to go punch somebody in the face, I think you'll be all right. Because people that care about being arrogant never are arrogant in a million years, right? Right? But just because you become companionable and in good relationship with yourself doesn't mean to say you're going to become an arse. It doesn't. It doesn't work like that. You will recalibrate the other way and go, okay, I'm in good relationship with myself, but I don't feel like punching somebody in the face, right? I still care about the world. I care about me as well. That's the dynamic we're looking for.
That's good.
In my opinion.
That's good. So if you're slightly concerned that you're appearing arrogant, in a way that's not a bad thing, because that's kind of hopefully going to recalibrate things. You're not going to.
You're never going to. What you might find, and this is what I say, well, when people are practicing being companionable to themselves, what you might find is that you put your foot in it a little bit. You know, I sometimes say things that come off sometimes a bit brash, but I've practiced it. So, for instance, I'm really conscious if somebody says, "Do you want to do so and so?" I try to know myself well enough to make sure that the answer is yes or no based on what I actually believe, and I'm not saying yes, but I mean no. So, you know how you might go, no, I don't want to, and you go, oh, that came over really bad because I wasn't practiced at looking after myself then. So, and that's not arrogance, it's just lack of practice. So, yeah, I don't think people should worry about arrogance in their life as much as their brutality towards themselves. Their inner brutality towards themselves is way more destructive than a bit of arrogance that slips out now and again. Okay?
Yeah. I definitely see that, and I think that's such an important thing to say. So when it comes to putting ourselves out there, you know, when it comes to the whole area of marketing and live video and video, I will admit I've struggled with that in many ways. I feel like I'm a reluctant live video guy, because putting myself out there, I've struggled with that because it's putting me out there. It's maybe it's because some of the things I was talking about before. Maybe we don't like ourselves, or we're not wanting to appear arrogant. We're not wanting to appear all about ourselves. And I see this time and time again with my clients and with the audience that I speak with. So, you know, I think putting yourself out there and going live can be difficult because inside we might not like ourselves that much. Have you got any tips on how we can get out there? And if we've got a heart to help people, and as business owners, we might not want to put ourselves out there, but how would we go about doing that?
Okay, well, first of all, I would go straight into asking if that's what the person wants. If they want to be out there, but they're finding it difficult, that's a very different experience to thinking they ought to be out there. So, first of all, ditch the ought. Like, if you don't want to do it, that's okay. You can do your marketing in a different way. And, you know, you talked earlier about there being barriers to being out there live or just doing video. But the barriers are okay. You don't have to do this. But if you want to, what you're probably finding is that your psyche, your mind, is tricking you a little bit. It's because if there's parts or elements of you or your personality that you're not keen on, that the mind will play this little trick on you, go, those are the only bits that the audience can see, right? So it feels exposing. It feels like you've got no skin on and you're turning yourself inside out and people can see your vulnerability. Okay? So what I help people with is I help them build a companionable relationship with themselves, so that they don't brutalize themselves. They don't swear, berate, or harangue themselves internally. They never fall out with themselves, and they've never let themselves down again, because they are companionable. They'll make mistakes, they'll make oaths of themselves, they'll do stuff they're not proud of, but what they don't do is give so much attention to that that becomes part of their identity. They just have the feelings, move through, and do differently next time, which is true responsibility. We're not looking for perfection here, but this is the work that I do, is help people build what I call good, and that sounds judgmental, but I believe a good relationship with self is a companionable one, not a brutal one.
Yeah.
Because if you're calling yourself an effing idiot because it's tricky to get in front of the camera, or I don't do a 16-hour day, or whatever you're brutalizing yourself about, that just uses energy that you can transfer to something else.
Definitely. And I think what you said before, the live video, getting in front of the camera, putting yourself out there is not necessarily for everybody. You've got to think, well, what is actually good for my business? What's good for me? But if you do think, well, actually, I think I should be doing this, there may be these barriers holding you back. And this whole, I'm fascinated by this whole, the concepts of being companionable, being kind to yourself. So obviously, this is a huge topic, and you'll spend, I'm sure, hours and hours and hours with your clients. And the kind of question I'm going to ask you next is probably impossible for you to do. But what are the kind of, if there are some takeaways that people can have, in terms of making the first steps to this whole idea of being companionable, what would you say? What are the first things that we should be rethinking? Have you got any practical tips for us?
Yeah, I think the first step is to notice what you do. Just notice what you do. If you, let's say you have a day where you don't feel like you've done enough work stuff, and do you spend the whole evening going, oh, you idiot, what a waste, why did you do that? You're so useless. Find out what your narrative is, and everybody's got a unique narrative where the brutality shows up. So once you notice it, you can decide, what do I do with that? First of all, am I okay with it? I mean, some people are so habituated in being brutal to themselves that they either don't notice they do it or they quite like it. We get used to and habituated in what the brain loves and knows. So the brain absolutely adores what it knows, even if it's working against us. So you have to then rewire that. You have to on purpose go, actually, do I want to continue doing that? I think every single client leader that I've worked with over the years, I ask every single one of them at the end of the piece of work, and this is without fail, and I promise you this is true, I ask how much energy has that person got back now they're not brutalizing themselves and they're in companionable relationship with themselves, and they've all said 30%. Now 30% extra energy towards your business, like one person said they raised another £1 million within their business in the following year once they've done the work, right? Somebody else in a bigger business got back at boardroom table having lost 50 million in deals whilst they were away from the boardroom. But once they were back in it, they were there to do the deals. So it has a massive effect on people's contentment and ease, and also their business. And of course, everything within us gets translated into our business, right?
Definitely. So do you think it's a way of focusing on, at a very simplistic level, focusing on our strengths? Because as opposed to our weaknesses, something that I know that I struggled with years and years and years ago, I was on a leadership course and they asked us to write down our strengths. And I couldn't answer the question. It was actually my wife who said, yeah, you're good at that and that and that and that. I thought, yeah, so I am. So do you think sometimes we just have a very, like a false image of ourselves, or we need to kind of actually really learn to know ourselves and actually have a true image of ourselves in our minds, so that we can actually have more of a companionable relationship with ourselves?
Yeah, I think you need to do the deep work, not you personally. We have to go into ourselves and find out who I am and who I'm not. Because otherwise we become constructed by the symptoms that we have, like lack of confidence, lack of self-esteem, imposter syndrome, self-sabotage. Those are all symptoms of being in poor relationship with yourself. So you have to dig deep and go, who am I and who am I not? And if you're not okay with who you are and who you're not, then that's what you address. So if you don't see anything as a strength and weakness, it just it is as it is. And if you're okay with that, fine, move on. If you're not, what do you want to do next? Yeah. So, and the thing is, if we try to distract ourselves from the stuff that's getting in the way, which you're calling perhaps the weaknesses, then we can only do that for a time, because they'll find a way of showing up again in a symptom, or they'll manifest in your business and bugger it up, it will come out somewhere. So it's about arriving in your own body and life and going, am I doing what I want? Am I who I want to be? Of course, we're all at the mercy of our temperaments. Is there stuff about us that we're not okay with? Do we want to do something about it or not? Like people that know me, like I'm really a really messy person. Am I bothered to do something about it? Does that define me? No. Do I like a tidy house? Yes. Do I care about it that much? I don't. Right? And if I did, I'd do something about it. So I could work on caring more about it, but I care about another 10 things way more.
Yeah. So it's priorities, isn't it? Really thinking what are the priorities in my life? What I want to really focus on? Because like you, yes, tidy house would be pretty high up there, but yeah, there are more important things, unfortunately, out there. And do you think that? So it was going back to something you said earlier. You were talking about that sometimes these things we can not want. We almost enjoy. Our brain almost enjoys beating ourselves up. That wasn't quite the phrase that you used, but it strikes me. Yeah, it strikes me like. Would you say this is almost like an addiction in a way? We can become addicted to this way of thinking, and it's almost it's a form of self-abuse, isn't it? So
yeah, you've got to be really careful with that, because nobody's to blame for this, right? We're at the mercy of our neurology, and that's why all of these things that we started this discussion on are actually all forms of being in poor relationship with yourself. So it's not an addiction in the sense that people set out for it to be like that. The brain becomes imprinted by habit, and because of where we are culturally, we get way more positive strokes for being for berating ourselves and being in poor relationship than we do for being full of ourselves and proud. Okay, so it's nobody's fault. The brain becomes habituated to harangue yourself and beat yourself up, you were saying. So the practical step is just start training yourself the other way. Use that energy to put the big stick down. Use the energy to go, actually, I'm not going to swear and harangue myself. I'm going to go, okay, I'm not keen on what happened there, but I'm going to do differently next time. You've got to go into that nuance of that internal dynamic to explode it from the inside out. Otherwise, it's in control of you rather than you being in control of it. If that makes sense.
That makes sense. And something that I've been thinking about as you've been speaking today is I wonder whether we need to come up with a new vocabulary to describe these things, because like some of the words that I've used, like beating myself up, and a lot of these things are quite negative, and maybe we need to think of like a new vocabulary to describe things and to. So would you agree with that? And how do we go about that? What you've kind of answered this a little bit, but as people finish listening to this podcast, what are some couple of practical steps, the first things that they can do to start this journey?
I think it's really useful, and clients of mine have said it's valuable for them to look at how big the inner brutality is. So I have renamed it. I coined the phrase inner brutality of thought and action, right? And companionability to self is the exact opposite. That means being in a dynamic relationship with self. So practically what you can do from now is just go into yourself and go, crumbs, how much of this, what percentage of my day, of my inner world, do I spend being, what's the word, like brutal towards myself? Am I beating myself up for a good portion of the day? What's ever enough? Do I ever achieve and go, yeah, that was a great day, or that I'm okay, I'm a good person? And so tallying it up can be quite helpful. I mean, literally drawing a circle on a page and going, how much of me in my head is brutalizing myself? And some people find like it's 90%. Some people find it's 10%. But it's useful to know. But any inner brutality is going to start scuppering really who you are and your growth.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? And therefore often your business growth also.
And sometimes I think there's this feeling of like, I don't deserve this. So this happened to me. I produced my first course about 4 years ago. It went really, really well. I was selling at hotcakes. And I remember thinking to myself, what's going on here? This is a total fluke. I mean, why are people... I was just waiting for the first complaint that somebody would say, this course is really bad, I want my money back. But that didn't really happen. And when it came to my second course, I thought it was a case of self-sabotage, because I kind of was willing myself to fail, because it was almost like I didn't deserve a second chance at this. Does that sound like self-sabotage to you?
Kind of. It's what happens is our defenses are based on keeping us safe. So our our defensive behavior is often about safety. So it could have been that you felt exposed, or you tried to prepare yourself, well, when's this all going to go wrong? So rather than make another course, I don't want to have to deal with worrying about whether it's going to go wrong or not. I'll make it go wrong at the beginning. And that's all about the same thing. That's all about relationship with self. Now, you can go into it and go, oh, being in the self-knowledge that I worry about my safety. It doesn't feel right. So the deserving, like the belonging in a way, the imposter syndrome, it all comes down to the same. How are you okay with who you are and who you're not? Right? And because then, of course, you deserve the success. Why wouldn't you if you're in that relationship? So it's finding, and don't take it up as personal, right? This is all neurological. It's all imprinted way before we had a chance to know it was imprinted. And of course, as adults, we go, oh, crikey, what, this bloody thing's in control. I need to find out, is this serving me, or is the circuitry out of date? Because we can look intellectually and go, well, of course you deserve that success. You worked for it, you got it, boom, move on. But your mind, the wiring is going, oh, I'm not sure about that. Yeah? So it would be an old neural pathway that's having a little shout, going, oh, this is a bit uncomfortable. This is a bit uncomfortable. And that's what you want to rewire if you don't want the discomfort of that undeserving feeling again. Yeah?
That makes sense.
So sometimes self-sabotage isn't what it isn't what it purported to be. Self-sabotage is just like, I'd rather not go through that again. Clever. That's clever thinking, right? Clever thinking. True self-sabotage is utter recklessness. And so most self-sabotage is about the relationship with self manifesting itself in the world. And the issue I have around self-sabotage and imposter syndrome and all of these things are, it's not personal, it's neurological. And people start judging themselves and blaming themselves, and therefore we then get deeper into deepening those neural pathways that we're not keen on in the first place. Yeah. It's more to brutalize about ourselves.
So it's a cycle. It's a kind of like a vicious circle.
Yes, it can be. In the coaching world, you hear it all the time. You hear it, people go, oh, self-sabotaging. Wow, that's really considerate for the person that is manifesting symptoms about that they don't feel worthy, maybe, or they're frightened of succeeding. Okay, that's all normal. but don't blame them. Don't humiliate them about it. Do you see?
Yeah, totally see, because that's the problem.
So even yeah, it's a huge problem, right? Look at the coaching world saying that person's got a victim mentality. Worst thing I've ever heard anybody say about anyone. Because what that person's doing by saying that person's got a victim mentality is they're victimizing them, right? It's totally counterintuitive. That person is the victim of something and they feel weakened by the situation. They're not weak, right? We have to be really conscious in this coaching world to be careful we don't abuse our power.
Yeah,
and that goes full circle to why people may be afraid of being live in front of the camera, because they know it's a powerful medium and they're not sure whether they want that power. And they're also not sure, are they in good enough relationships with themselves that they don't abuse it?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, totally agree. It's a very vulnerable medium, if that's the right phrase, because it's very difficult to, you can kind of cover up the cracks maybe on a edited video.
They're far too deep. They're far too deep.
This has been a great conversation. This is a great conversation. We've only kind of touched the surface. There's so much more we could talk about, and maybe we have you back on the show and we can talk about this on a deeper level. But thank you so much, Anna, for coming on the show. And I know that this will have touched my listeners. And if you're listening to this podcast and this has touched you, then get in touch. Let us know what you think about this. And of course, Anna, you're on the socials. You've got a website. What's the best place that people can find you? And also, tell us a little bit more about how you work with individuals and businesses and how you can help people.
Well, I work one-to-one with people around the world, because it's fabulous with Skype and Zoom and FaceTime now. So I literally work with people around the world, America, Middle East, Europe. So yeah, people, the one-to-one work I do is really helping people who maybe are already successful, incredibly successful, but they can't enjoy it, or something's pitched up in their inner brutality that started to ruin what they're happy about and their business. And so I do this companionability work, and we do the rewiring work. We look at what the neurological template has in it, and does it serve that person or not anymore. Very often it's simply the fact that it's out of date. It was programmed in at the age of 10 years old, and now somebody's 40 or 50, and it's just out of date. And that's the way I like to see it, because it's incredibly blame-free. We're seeing what's there. Is it serving them? Yes or no? Boom, move on. Let's do the work. That's the one-to-one stuff I do. Now with companies, in a way it's similar, but we start by educating the company in what this stuff is, like what is burnout. Then the next bit, which is how does burnout manifest? How does chronic stress affect all the systems of the body? And of course, then we come in and talk about the companionability and how that matters. Because the simple fact is, whether you're a company or an individual, if you're in brutal relationship with yourself, you're weaker. Not a weak person, you're just weakened because you're spending a hell of a lot of energy fighting yourself inadvertently. And the exact opposite is true. If you're in companionable relationship with yourself and you explode that over a company as well, that person or company is stronger and can sustain its growth. And that's the simplicity of it, really. I try to make it simple. And it is quite simple in my mind, but of course, there's elements of the constellation that are tricky to cover in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, definitely. So is the best place to your website, which is annapinkerton.com? I've got that right?
Yeah, it's just annapinkerton.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I tend to hang out there a bit more, but yeah. So yeah. By all means.
That's fab. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Anna. It's been great. I do enjoy these really deep conversations. I hope that if you're listening or watching the replay, that you've enjoyed that too. And yeah, well, we'll have to continue this discussion another time. We'll have to get you back on the show, but it's been great to have you on. But it's time to finish. And so until next time, I encourage you to level up your impact, authority, and profits through the power of confident live video. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Confident Live Marketing Podcast with Ian Anderson Gray. Be sure to join the community at iag.me, where you can continue to level up your impact, authority, and profits through the power of live video. And until next time, toodaloo.